attention to what you're about to see. This surveillance footage was recovered from a hidden camera inside an abandoned warehouse in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. Look closely at the figure strapped to that chair. Notice the way its head tilts unnaturally to one side. Now here's what makes this footage so disturbing. That's not actually an alien. That's 13-year-old Emily Richardson, a college freshman who disappeared after responding to an online ad. And the person behind the camera? He's about to transform psychological torture into a business that would shatter 8 families and expose one of the most twisted criminal operations the FBI has ever encountered. What you're looking at is the moment before everything Emily knew about reality would be stripped away forever. You know that feeling when you're scrolling through your phone and you see something that makes you stop cold? For Linda Richardson, that moment came on a Tuesday morning in September when she opened her daughter's laptop. Emily had been missing for 3 days, and Linda was desperate for any clue about where her daughter might have gone. What she found in Emily's browser history would lead investigators down a rabbit hole so bizarre, so methodically evil, that even seasoned federal agents would struggle to comprehend it. Emily Richardson wasn't supposed to be anyone's victim. She was smart, cautious, the kind of kid who always texted her mom when she got somewhere safe. At 19, she'd just started her sophomore year at Kirkwood Community College, studying psychology with dreams of becoming a therapist. She lived with 3 roommates in a modest apartment near campus, worked part-time at a coffee shop, and spent most of her free time either studying or hanging out with her boyfriend, Marcus Chen. But Emily had one particular interest that set her apart from most college students. She was absolutely fascinated by the possibility of extraterrestrial life. Not in a conspiracy theory kind of way. She didn't think the government was hiding aliens in Area 51 or anything like that. Emily approached it from a scientific angle. She'd spend hours watching documentaries about the Fermi paradox, reading articles about exoplanets, and discussing the statistical probability of intelligent life existing somewhere in the universe. Her roommate Jessica would joke that Emily was going to be the first person to make contact with aliens someday. That fascination is exactly what Dr. Anthony Kellerman was counting on. September 2017 started like any other month for Emily. Classes were going well. She'd just gotten a promotion at the coffee shop, and she was planning a weekend trip to Chicago with Marcus. But on September 12th, something caught her attention while browsing a forum dedicated to SETI research and astrobiology. It was an advertisement, professionally designed, with a sleek logo at the top that read, Meridian Institute for Extraterrestrial Studies. The ad explained that the institute was conducting groundbreaking research into human perception of alien contact scenarios. They were looking for volunteers to participate in what they called immersive psychological experiments, designed to understand how the human mind would process first contact with an extraterrestrial species. Participants would be paid $3,000 for a weekend-long study. All expenses covered. The location was listed as a private research facility about 45 minutes outside Cedar Rapids. Here's the thing about targeted manipulation. It works because it speaks directly to something deep inside you. And for Emily, this ad hit every single note perfectly. The opportunity to participate in legitimate scientific research about extraterrestrial contact, the chance to contribute to humanity's preparation for one of the most significant events that could ever occur, plus $3,000 that would help with tuition. She was hooked before she even finished reading. Emily called the number listed in the ad on September 13th. A woman answered, professional and warm, introducing herself as Dr. Sarah Mitchell, the Institute's research coordinator. She asked Emily a series of questions about her interest in extraterrestrial life, her psychological stability, any history of anxiety or panic disorders. The conversation lasted about 20 minutes, and by the end, Dr. Mitchell told Emily she'd be perfect for the study. They scheduled her participation for the following weekend, September 22nd through 24th. What Emily didn't know, what none of the victims knew, was that Dr. Sarah Mitchell didn't exist. The voice on the phone belonged to Rebecca Solis, a woman who'd spent 6 years working as a psychiatric nurse before losing her license due to ethical violations involving patient medication. She'd been recruited by Dr. Anthony Kellerman specifically because she knew how to identify vulnerable targets and make them feel safe. And Dr. Anthony Kellerman? He wasn't a doctor at all. Born Aaron Kelly in Portland, Oregon, he'd dropped out of a community college aerospace engineering program after one semester. But he was smart in a dangerous way, the kind of intelligence that calculates risk and reward, that understands psychology well enough to exploit it, that sees human suffering as a commodity to be monetized. Emily told her roommates about the research study on September 15th. Jessica was skeptical immediately. Em, doesn't this sound kind of weird to you? I mean, what kind of legitimate research facility operates out in the middle of nowhere? But Emily showed her the website, professionally designed, filled with academic-sounding language, even featuring photos of what appeared to be scientists in lab coats working with advanced equipment. There was a page listing the Institute's advisory board with impressive-sounding credentials. Everything looked legitimate because Kellerman had spent months making it look that way. Marcus was concerned too, but Emily assured him she'd be fine. She'd done her research. The Institute had an address, a phone number, even reviews from supposed past participants. What she didn't realize was that every single element of that digital presence had been fabricated. Kellerman had created a false reality so convincing that even careful people like Emily couldn't see through it. On the morning of September 22nd, Emily packed a small overnight bag, just some comfortable clothes, toiletries, her phone charger, and a notebook where she liked to write down interesting thoughts and observations. She kissed Marcus goodbye, hugged her roommates, and promised to text them when she arrived. Then she climbed into her Honda Civic and drove toward coordinates that would lead her to hell disguised as a research facility. The location turned out to be an industrial complex, about 50 minutes outside Cedar Rapids, down increasingly rural roads, until Emily found herself pulling up to what looked like a converted warehouse. There was a small sign near the entrance. Meridian Institute, private property. A woman emerged from the building as Emily parked. She recognized the voice from the phone. Rebecca Solis smiled warmly and welcomed Emily inside. That's when Emily sent her last text message to Marcus. Just got here. Place looks legit. Love you. Talk soon. The interior of the warehouse had been staged carefully. The front area looked like a legitimate research facility. White walls, fluorescent lighting, a desk with computers, even a waiting area with magazines. Rebecca led Emily through this space, chatting casually about the study, making her feel comfortable. Then they passed through a door into what Rebecca called the observation wing. The atmosphere changed immediately. The hallway was dimmer, the walls bare concrete. Emily felt the first flutter of unease, but Rebecca's constant friendly chatter kept her moving forward. I know it looks a bit industrial back here, but the observation rooms are quite comfortable. This building used to be a manufacturing facility, so we're working with what we have. They reached a room at the end of the hallway. Rebecca opened the door and gestured Emily inside. The room was small, maybe 12 by 12 feet, with concrete walls painted a dull gray. There was a chair in the center, metal with thick arms and a high back. Medical equipment lined one wall, monitors and machines that Emily didn't recognize. A camera was mounted in the corner near the ceiling. This is where we'll conduct the first phase of the study, Rebecca explained. The chair is equipped with sensors that will monitor your physiological responses, heart rate, brain activity, stress levels. We'll show you various visual and auditory stimuli designed to simulate different types of potential alien contact scenarios, and we'll measure how your body and brain respond. It's completely non-invasive and safe. Emily hesitated. Something about this felt wrong now, but she'd driven all this way, and she didn't want to seem paranoid or difficult. She sat in the chair. Rebecca began attaching what looked like EKG sensors to Emily's chest and arms, explaining each one as she went. Then she brought out what she called the immersion headset, a bulky device that would cover Emily's eyes and ears. This helps create a more realistic simulation, Rebecca said. You'll see 3D images and hear spatial audio. It'll feel very real, but remember, it's all just computer generated. You're completely safe. Emily put on the headset. Everything went dark except for a faint green glow. Rebecca's voice came through the headphones. I'm going to step out for just a moment to start the monitoring equipment from the control room. Sit tight, and we'll begin in just a minute." Emily heard a door close, then nothing. She waited in the darkness, her heart beating faster now. Something was definitely wrong. She tried to lift her hands to remove the headset and realized with sudden, ice-cold terror that she couldn't move them. At some point during the sensor attachment, Rebecca had secured restraints around her wrists and ankles. She was strapped to the chair. Emily screamed. She thrashed against the restraints, but they held firm. The headset made everything worse. She couldn't see anything, couldn't orient herself in space. Panic flooded through her system as her rational mind tried desperately to make sense of what was happening. This was supposed to be a research study. This was supposed to be safe. What was going on? Then a voice came through the headphones. Male, calm, almost gentle. "Emily, I need you to stop struggling and listen very carefully. My name is Dr. Kellerman, and I'm going to explain exactly what's happening to you right now." Back in Cedar Rapids, Marcus started getting worried around 2 p.m. Emily usually texted him throughout the day, just little updates about whatever she was doing. He'd expected to hear from her after she arrived at the research facility, but her one text that morning had been the last. He tried calling. It went straight to voicemail. By 6 p.m., Marcus was calling Emily's roommates. Jessica answered, and he could hear the concern in her voice immediately. "I thought she would have checked in by now, too. This is weird, right? Should we be worried?" They decided to give it until morning. Maybe the facility had a policy about phone use during the study. Maybe Emily's phone had died. There were reasonable explanations, but none of them could shake the growing sense of dread. Meanwhile, 40 miles away, Emily was learning the horrifying truth about where she really was. Dr. Kellerman's voice through the headphones was disturbingly calm as he explained. This wasn't a research study. This wasn't a legitimate institute. Emily was now part of what he called an immersive experience that would last as long as he decided it should last. Her family would be told she was safe and participating in an extended research program. They wouldn't look for her. No one would come. Then he told her something that made her blood run cold. "Emily, when I remove your headset, you're going to see yourself differently. Your mind might struggle to process what you see. That's normal. That's part of the experience. But I need you to understand something very important. The more you cooperate, the easier this will be. The more you resist, the more uncomfortable things will become." The headset was removed. Emily blinked in the sudden light, her eyes adjusting. She looked down at her body and screamed. Her arms weren't her arms anymore. They were thin, gray, almost skeletal. Her skin had a strange pallor, and her hands looked elongated, wrong. She couldn't process what she was seeing. Was this real? Had something been done to her? She tried to make sense of it, but the panic was overwhelming. What Emily couldn't see was that she'd been dressed in an elaborate costume while she was restrained. The thin gray skin was actually a carefully constructed bodysuit made from theatrical latex. Her hands were covered in prosthetic extensions that made them appear alien. But from her perspective, unable to see her own face, disoriented from the restraints and the sensory deprivation of the headset, her mind struggled to reconcile what she was seeing. This was Kellerman's method. This was the psychological torture that made his operation unique and, in his twisted mind, valuable. He didn't just kidnap people. He made them question their own reality. He made them doubt their own perception of themselves. Let me paint you a picture of who Anthony Kellerman really was. He'd been obsessed with UFO culture since childhood, but not in the way Emily was. Emily was interested in the science and the possibility. Kellerman was interested in the mythology, the fear, the cultural panic that surrounded alien abduction stories. He saw an opportunity. In early 2014, Kellerman started researching the dark web markets where people bought and sold disturbing content. He realized there was a demand for something that didn't really exist: genuine footage of alien encounters and abductions. Of course, such footage didn't exist because aliens weren't actually abducting people. But Kellerman thought, what if he could create footage so realistic, so psychologically disturbing, that buyers on the dark web would pay premium prices for it? That's when he started planning the Meridian Institute. He spent nearly a year setting it up. He found the warehouse property, owned by a holding company he'd created using false documents. He recruited Rebecca Solis, who had her own reasons for wanting to stay off law enforcement radar and was willing to help for a cut of the profits. He designed the fake website, created the fake identities for the advisory board, and perfected his method of identifying and selecting victims who fit a specific profile. Young, intelligent, isolated enough that their temporary disappearance wouldn't immediately trigger a massive search, and obsessed with the idea of extraterrestrial life. Emily was his sixth victim. The first had been a 21-year-old named Thomas Whitmore, taken in January 2015. Kellerman kept him for 4 days, filming hours of footage showing Thomas in various states of psychological breakdown, dressed in the alien costume, subjected to what Kellerman called interrogation sessions, where he asked bizarre questions while Thomas, drugged with hallucinogens and trapped in a nightmare he couldn't understand, gave responses that ranged from confused to terrified to completely dissociated. Then Kellerman let Thomas go. He drove him back to a location near where he'd been taken, removed the costume, gave him sedatives, and left him on a park bench. When Thomas woke up, he had fragmented memories of his experience, being restrained, seeing his own body transformed, hearing questions he couldn't comprehend, feeling like reality itself had fractured. But the memories were so bizarre, so inconsistent with everyday reality, that Thomas convinced himself it must have been some kind of drug-induced psychotic break. He never reported it. That was the genius of Kellerman's operation. The experience was so unbelievable, so psychologically devastating, that victims either convinced themselves it was a hallucination or were too traumatized and confused to report what happened. And even if they did report it, who would believe them? "I was kidnapped by someone who dressed me up as an alien" sounds like the ramblings of someone having a mental health crisis. By the time Emily was taken, Kellerman had refined his process. He had regular buyers on the dark web who paid thousands of dollars for his footage. He'd learned exactly how to manipulate his victims psychologically, combining sensory deprivation, hallucinogenic drugs, and the shock of seeing themselves in costume to create genuine psychological distress that made the footage disturbing and authentic enough to command high prices. Back in Cedar Rapids, September 23rd arrived with no word from Emily. Marcus drove to the address listed on the Meridian Institute's website. He found the warehouse, saw Emily's Honda Civic in the parking lot, and felt his heart drop. He called the police. Officer David Santos arrived within 20 minutes. He approached the building, knocked on the front entrance. Rebecca Solis answered, smiled pleasantly, and explained that yes, Emily Richardson was participating in a research study and was doing fine. The study required participants to avoid outside contact for the duration. It was part of the isolation variable they were testing. Emily had signed a consent form acknowledging this. She would be free to leave in 2 more days. Officer Santos asked to see Emily. Rebecca hesitated, then said that interrupting the study would compromise the data, and Emily had specifically requested not to be disturbed. She showed him a clipboard with what appeared to be Emily's signature on a consent form. This is where things could have ended very differently. Officer Santos felt something was off. He radioed for backup and insisted on seeing Emily in person to verify she was there voluntarily. Rebecca's friendly demeanor shifted slightly, but she maintained her composure. "Of course, officer. Let me just check if she's at a point where we can interrupt safely." Rebecca disappeared into the back of the building. She went straight to Kellerman, who was in the middle of a session with Emily. "Police are here. They want to see her." Kellerman made a decision in that moment that would ultimately lead to his downfall. Instead of trying to quickly remove Emily's costume and present her as a willing participant, he panicked. He sedated Emily heavily, then he and Rebecca carried her through a hidden exit at the back of the warehouse and loaded her into a van. They drove her to a secondary location, a storage unit about 20 miles away, where Kellerman kept equipment and archived footage. When Officer Santos waited too long and Rebecca didn't return, he entered the building with his backup. They found the front area empty. They searched deeper into the warehouse and discovered the room where Emily had been held. The chair was still there with the restraints hanging loose. Medical equipment, the camera. But no Emily and no Rebecca. Santos immediately called it in as a suspected kidnapping. Within hours, FBI agents were at the scene. Within a day, they'd identified the building's ownership trail leading to shell companies. They'd recovered security footage from the warehouse system showing Emily being brought in, and more critically, showing Kellerman and Rebecca fleeing with an unconscious victim. But here's what made the case even more urgent. When FBI technical analysts started examining the computers found in the warehouse, they discovered Kellerman's archive, hundreds of hours of footage, multiple victims, and they discovered his dark web accounts where he'd been selling this content for the past 3 years. Special Agent Jennifer Morrison was assigned to lead the case. She'd been with the FBI for 12 years, specializing in crimes involving technology and exploitation. But when she watched the footage from Kellerman's computers, she'd never seen anything quite like it. The psychological manipulation was so extreme, so methodically planned. She realized they weren't just looking for Emily Richardson. They were looking for every person who'd been through Kellerman's facility. The investigation moved fast. FBI analysts traced Kellerman's online activity and identified 6 additional victims. Thomas Whitmore, who'd been first. Michelle Park, taken for 5 days in 2015. David Sullivan, Jacob Torres, Hannah Goldstein, and Ryan Matthews. All taken between 2015 and 2017, all subjected to the same process, all released afterward in various states of psychological trauma. Agent Morrison's team started contacting these former victims. Most initially refused to talk about their experiences. The shame and confusion they felt was overwhelming. But when agents explained that they had physical evidence, that other people had gone through the same thing, that this was real and not a hallucination, several of them agreed to cooperate. David Sullivan, a 24-year-old software developer from Minneapolis who'd been taken in March 2016, finally told someone what had happened to him. "I thought I was losing my mind," he said during his interview. "For 2 years, I convinced myself it was a drug-induced episode. I even checked myself into a psychiatric hospital because I thought I was having psychotic breaks, but it was real. It all actually happened." The victims' testimonies were crucial, but the FBI still needed to find Kellerman and Rebecca, and most importantly, they needed to find Emily while she was still alive. Agent Morrison studied Kellerman's patterns obsessively. She reviewed every piece of footage, every transaction, every digital footprint. She noticed something interesting. Whenever Kellerman released a victim, he did it within a 5-mile radius of where he'd taken them. It was part of his psychological game, putting them back in familiar territory while their minds were still fractured. If he followed that pattern with Emily, he'd want to release her somewhere near Cedar Rapids. But Emily had been taken 5 days ago now, longer than Kellerman had ever kept anyone. Either something had changed, or Emily was in serious danger. Then they caught a break. One of Kellerman's dark web buyers had been arrested in Germany on unrelated charges. German authorities cooperated with the FBI, and the buyer revealed that Kellerman had recently contacted him about purchasing extended documentation of a subject, footage that would show the psychological deterioration over a longer period. He was asking for significantly more money. The buyer had expressed interest, and Kellerman promised to deliver within a week. Kellerman was planning to keep Emily longer. He was escalating, and if the FBI didn't find her soon, there was no telling how far he'd go. Agent Morrison's team analyzed cell tower data from the area around the warehouse on the day Emily was taken. They'd been doing this methodically, but now they cross-referenced it with data from the day Kellerman and Rebecca fled. They found 2 phones that pinged towers in both instances and tracked their subsequent movement. The phones led them to a storage facility on the outskirts of Marion, Iowa. On September 28th, 6 days after Emily's abduction, FBI agents surrounded the facility. They found the van from the security footage, and they found Anthony Kellerman and Rebecca Solis, along with Emily Richardson, still alive but in desperate need of medical attention. Emily was unconscious, severely dehydrated, and showing signs of drug toxicity. She was rushed to University of Iowa hospitals where doctors worked to stabilize her. She'd been kept in the alien costume for nearly a week straight, had been given regular doses of hallucinogens and sedatives, and had been subjected to hours of psychological torture that Kellerman had been carefully documenting. Kellerman and Rebecca were arrested without incident. When agents searched the storage unit, they found terabytes of additional footage, detailed records of every victim, financial records showing hundreds of thousands of dollars in payments from dark web buyers, and equipment for creating the elaborate costumes. But they also found something that would become crucial evidence: the surveillance footage that Kellerman himself had recorded. The same footage that would later be shown in court, the footage that started with that haunting image of what appeared to be an alien strapped to a chair, but was actually a young woman trapped in a nightmare. Emily spent 3 weeks in the hospital, both for physical recovery and intensive psychiatric evaluation. Her family stayed with her the entire time. Marcus never left her side. The psychological damage was profound. Emily had been made to doubt her own perception of reality, had been kept in a state of terror and confusion for 6 days, had experienced something so traumatic that her mind had partially dissociated to protect itself. The other victims were also contacted and offered support services. Several of them had developed serious mental health issues in the aftermath of their experiences: PTSD, anxiety disorders, dissociative episodes. Learning that what happened to them was real, was documented, was part of a larger criminal operation, provided some relief but also brought up tremendous anger and pain. The trial began in March 2018 at the U.S. District Court for the Northern District of Iowa. Federal prosecutors brought overwhelming evidence: the footage, the victims' testimonies, the financial records, the forensic analysis of Kellerman's computers. The defense tried to argue diminished capacity, suggesting Kellerman had delusional disorder and genuinely believed he was conducting legitimate research. The jury didn't buy it. On July 15, 2018, Anthony Kellerman was convicted on multiple federal charges: 6 counts of kidnapping, 7 counts of production and distribution of violent content, 7 counts of administering controlled substances without consent, multiple counts of fraud and identity theft, and numerous other charges related to his operation. The prosecution emphasized that Kellerman had built a sophisticated criminal enterprise designed specifically to torture vulnerable people and profit from their suffering. The sentencing hearing was emotional. Several victims gave impact statements. Emily Richardson, still visibly struggling with the trauma, told the court, "He didn't just take 6 days of my life. He took my sense of safety, my trust in my own mind, my ability to feel real in my own body. I see his face in my dreams. I feel those restraints when I close my eyes. He turned my own interests, my own curiosity about the universe, into a weapon against me. And I know I'm not the only one. We were all looking for something meaningful, something bigger than ourselves, and he turned that hope into torture." Rebecca Solis took a plea deal in exchange for her testimony against Kellerman. She was convicted on multiple counts of kidnapping and conspiracy and sentenced to 40 years in federal prison. Anthony Kellerman received 8 consecutive life sentences plus an additional 240 years. The judge stated that Kellerman had shown a level of premeditation, sophistication, and callous disregard for human suffering that warranted the maximum possible punishment. He would spend the rest of his life in federal prison with no possibility of parole. Emily Richardson spent years in therapy recovering from her ordeal. She eventually completed her psychology degree, though she changed her focus from research psychology to trauma counseling. She now works with survivors of kidnapping and psychological abuse, using her own experience to help others navigate their recovery. In 2020, Emily and several other victims from Kellerman's operation founded an organization called Verified Research Initiative, which maintains a database of legitimate research institutions and warns about red flags in recruitment practices. They've helped prevent dozens of similar schemes by educating young people about how to identify predatory research scams. The case led to new federal legislation requiring stricter oversight of entities claiming to conduct human subject research and increased penalties for crimes involving psychological torture and digital exploitation. Emily Richardson was 19 years old when she was taken. She was a young woman with dreams of understanding the universe, with a boyfriend who loved her, with a whole life ahead of her. What happened to her and the other victims in that warehouse outside Cedar Rapids wasn't science fiction. It was a calculated criminal operation built on exploitation and suffering. But Emily survived. She healed, and she dedicated her life to making sure no one else would fall into a trap like she did. Today, Emily is 35 years old. She's married to Marcus, and they have 2 daughters. She still looks up at the stars sometimes, still wonders about the possibility of life beyond Earth. But now, when she thinks about aliens, she doesn't think about Anthony Kellerman's nightmare. She thinks about curiosity, about hope, about the vast unknown that still holds beauty if you know where to look. Emily Richardson's story is one of survival, resilience, and the power of human connection to overcome even the darkest experiences. This case will never be forgotten, and neither will the young woman who refused to let evil define her future.